Was Plato a feminist? Some, including some women reading the history of philosophy, have looked at his work, have looked at the figure of Socrates, who called himself a midwife of ideas, whose teacher was a woman, Aspasia, a wise woman at that, and who argued in Book 5 of the Republic that women should be rulers just as much as men and be educated in the same ways and the same subjects as men of that ruling class. This is where he has Socrates talking about the ideal republic and setting up what that would look like. This is a view that earned Socrates quite a bit of ridicule, and one that he justifies with his metaphysics. Elizabeth Spelman, in her early and very important essay, Cobblers and Philosopher Queens, takes that kind of idea, takes that seriously, that claim that maybe Plato was a proto-feminist, right? A feminist before the feminist movement. And she looks at why he says what he says. Now, she's going to conclude that Plato was not a feminist, that his metaphysical views are what made him say that, not any kind of alliance with women or any sense of women's worth, intellectual or leadership-wise. But her argument is quite interesting and different from a couple of the other feminist readers that we'll take a look at. Her argument is that, it's just kind of give it to you in a nutshell, that the claim for equality between the sexes where it comes to dividing up the population into different classes is because of his belief that the soul is what makes a person, not a body. So whether a man has long hair or short hair doesn't matter, right? So why would sexual difference matter? Equality, and this is where it's key, that claim to equality is not only not incompatible with a certain form of non-egalitarian elitism, class elitism, but that it lies at its foundation. Now, I don't think that Elizabeth Spelman was thinking, and she's very focused on Plato, but I think this is a really good insight for feminists in general. The idea that the claim that feminism is about equal rights for men and women is not incompatible with classism in an interesting way. So let's take a look at that argument. Plato's case for women guardians, that the guardians are those who govern the state. So Plato's case for women guardians rests on his distinction between the soul, psyche, and the body. What makes someone a good ruler is the quality of their soul, or we might say their character, right? Not the kind of body that they inhabit. Since the soul is invisible, immortal, and distinct from the body, you can't really infer anything about a person's inner nature or character based on their bodily form. A bald man could be an excellent cobbler. A woman can have a philosopher's soul. The analogy is elegant and very straightforward logically. If sex is as irrelevant to the ruling capacity as hair quality is to cobbling, then excluding women from governance is simply irrational. And Plato here is not appealing to any democratic principle or women's rights. He doesn't believe in either, and we know that because of all the other things that both Socrates and that Socrates says about women, but also that are throughout Plato's dialogues. In order to understand this position, we need to know a little bit about Plato's dualistic metaphysics. And the reference to that is in Plato's Republic as well. The Republic is taken to be Plato's kind of the heart of Plato's philosophy. So I guess here I should say a little bit about Socrates and Plato. Aspasia was Socrates' teacher. Now, Aspasia was a wise woman and partner to the Athenian statesman Pericles, very well regarded. So Aspasia was Socrates' teacher. Socrates was Plato's teacher, and then Plato's Aristotle's teacher. Okay, so we have a clear handoff of ideas here. And in the time that Socrates lived, Athens had just gone through a very tumultuous time. Number one, they lost the Peloponnesian War, which was very traumatic because they had been such a force up to that point. This is going to start sounding familiar. So after that war, one of the kind of consequences of that is that there rises the tyrannical rule of the 30 tyrants, these oligarchs that take over. And they were very brutal. They eventually are overthrown through a populist movement, and that populist movement is becomes the democracy that we're familiar with. Now, Plato depicts Socrates as going around questioning all of the kind of wise men. He's questioning a segment of the population who held the power and making often look pretty bad, pretty ridiculous, right? And for that reason, those in power eventually find Socrates guilty. They take him to trial, and they find him guilty of, one, corrupting the youth through his teachings, and two, of not respecting the gods of the state. And they put him to death through the drinking of hemlock. And this whole scene is depicted by Plato in a series of dialogues. So Plato's early dialogues are called the Socratic dialogues because they are a clear depiction of Socrates and Socrates' teachings. Now, eventually we come to Plato's middle period, of which the Republic that we're looking at today is the chief dialogue. And it's thought to be the most mature articulation of his own philosophical beliefs and teachings. Now, there's some doubt, I guess. I don't really believe this ordering of the dialogues. There's a lot of debate about what order the dialogues were written in and how we should read them and such. This is the typical view, right? The canonical view. But Plato does write another dialogue that is thought to be a late dialogue called the Timaeus. And after the Timaeus, the Laws. And those are the last dialogues in the typical ordering of things. And in the Timaeus, he is changing his dualistic metaphysics into a tripartite. So he's adding something significant to his metaphysics, if you believe that the Timaeus is important to Plato's thought. Okay, I think that's, and we'll talk about the Timaeus more, but today we're going to focus really on the Republic. I think that's it for the historical context. And we'll, of course, talk about Aristotle later. So very briefly, Plato's dualistic metaphysics, which we can see in something called the cave analogy, but it's scattered throughout. I mean, it's throughout his works. The idea is that there's two realms, that reality is divided in two. We have the visible, immanent world of our experience, the phenomenal world, we could call it, right? The world in which there are phenomena that we can experience as humans that includes us. And that's a material world, is subject to decay, imperfect, etc. And then there is the realm of the forms. And this is an invisible realm. The soul, according to one of the dialogues, perceives the forms on the way into a body, and so has knowledge of the forms. And education, the theory of knowledge as recollection, is about the soul remembering the things that it knows because of experience prior to entering the body. So knowledge is thought to be in the soul. Now, this other realm is the formal realm, or the realm of forms, where, and our reality is based, or is a copy, it's a replication of, or an instantiation of a formal reality. So what we live in is grounded in, or originates in, the realm of the forms. So two worlds, the material, visible, imperfect realm of immanence, and the transcendent, invisible realm of eternal forms. That's dualism in a nutshell. There's lots that more that we can say about that, but I think that that's important just for understanding that the soul belongs to the transcendent realm and the body is a part of the material world. And so when we think about persons in this context, what Plato's saying, he's anchoring his metaphysics. And because he has these metaphysical views, he's going to say that whatever your body, it doesn't matter. What matters is what type of soul you have. So back to Spellman. Spellman is arguing that because of his metaphysical views, the point Socrates through the mouth of Plato, through the mouth of Socrates, the point he wants to drive home is that it is the soul that matters, and that the body has nothing to do with whether or not you can rule. Okay? So he's trying to drive home that point that there's a division between the soul and the body. That's his metaphysical point that he's trying to make. Now, women just happen to be lying around and handy for making that point. So he uses the division between the sexes in order to anchor the division between soul and body. Okay, so he's mounting, I like the word mounting, he's mounting soul-body, the distinction between soul and body, on the gender distinction, which is something that is in our experience. So it makes it easier for us to understand. Spellman grants all of this, and she notes that the soul-body distinction doesn't just liberate women from biological determinism, which is something that feminists are interested in, right? We, as feminists, want to say that whatever body you're born in, it doesn't determine your worth or your ability to do all sorts of things, right? So it establishes this, it doesn't just do that, which we do like. It also establishes a hierarchy in which some souls are fit to rule and others are fit to be ruled. Okay, it divides the population into those who can rule, who have special souls, and those who cannot. In this way, a female philosopher queen is the equal soul-wise, has the same kind of capacities as the male philosopher king, but she is not equal to the male cobbler or the female slave. And this matters because the argument tends to be abstracted from its context. So readers want to claim that Plato's a feminist because they focus on the equality between the sexes. But Spellman keeps reading, right? And she makes the argument that what makes the difference between those who can be rulers and those who cannot, one of the key features is that the ruler's most important responsibility is to distinguish, quote, the baseborn from the trueborn. That is to identify which natures are fit for which roles and assign people accordingly. So they alone have the authority to determine and decide the fates of all those other people who are not the rulers and to distribute those fates. The Republic begins with a claim that we all have needs and different talents, and we all have needs and we can't satisfy all of our needs very efficiently. So a just arrangement of things is one in which everyone is able to exercise their talents and contribute to the meeting of everyone's needs collectively without interference. Being able to do that which you are most able to do, most able to do without interference. But the key is that you don't get to decide what that is. That is assigned to you by the philosopher rulers. So the philosopher rulers are in charge of sorting people into their different roles. And that's where it kind of that's the part that we don't see as often, or we don't quite get to it as much. The authority to make this determination and to decide whose differences matter and whose don't is not democratically decided. That power belongs to the philosophers and philosophers alone. So we can see that an argument that's supposed to liberate women from the tyranny of biological determinism, which we like, turns out to underwrite a different kind of tyranny. That is the power of a philosophical elite to sort all human beings based on the quality of their souls, which they are in the sole position to evaluate. This is based on Spellman's understanding of the Republic as a work that supports or that advocates for a kind of elitism. And if you think of the historical context, her reading is that Socrates, who is pictured by Plato as being really great friends with Critias, who was the leader of the tyrants, the 30 tyrants, or with Alcibiades, who was a traitor to Athens, but he associates with a lot of the old guard, that Plato is making an argument for away from the kind of populist democratic system, which, after all, he saw this power, this democracy kill his guru, his teacher, right? So the idea is that he wants to return to a rule by elites who are in a better position to assess, to make the assessments and make the decisions. And that's interesting to me, particularly because I don't necessarily have that view. I mean, she has the historical, like, the history is there to make that kind of interpretation. But the Republic is very interesting in that it can be read to support and has been read to support many different kinds of viewpoints, from elitism to democracy. So, for example, we could say that Plato is depicting Socrates not as associating himself with these figures, but actually ridiculing them. He's questioning them in their claim to know something and to be good, and he's ridiculing them. And that's what actually gets him into trouble. So there's a different way to read the historical context here. There's also a reading of this that is communist, or that is Handmaid's Tale-ish and very conservative, because the children are not raised by the parents. All children belong to the state, not to their families, and they are raised in state-run childcare facilities. Okay, so this is very Scientology-ish, very cultish, very Handmaid's Tale kind of can be pictured. So the Republic inspires and can be read as supporting a full spectrum of different political positions or ideas about what the ideal political state could be. And that is a testament to the Republic as a piece of art, right? As a written work that can be interpreted in so many different ways. It is maybe a anti-testament to Plato's ability to make his point, because we don't actually know what his perspective was, or even Socrates. And it's kind of wild, all the different ways in which these dialogues can be read. Anyways, I'm kind of going on. But the point is that Elizabeth Spelman is making a point that I hadn't even understood when I read this piece originally. And I didn't see it because I did not have that view of Plato. But now it is very clear that the point that she's making is not only a critique of Plato, but also she's showing other feminists that it is perfectly compatible to have a view of the sexes as equal, based on the idea that bodies don't matter, that we should not make judgments about a person's capacities based on the type of body they have. That's compatible with elitism and with the division of the classes. And we see that, right? We see that where women identify themselves with those of their class much more than with the interest of other women who are not of their class. So that's very interesting. Spellman's piece is a pretty good example of the way in which, reading the history of philosophy, we are not only interpreting the text, right? What did Plato say? What did he mean? We're not only interpreting or assessing, judging the portrayal of women therein, or even the absence of women and women's experiences therein, but they become a way for us to understand our own conditions, because Spellman really leaves the reader with this uncomfortable question about contemporary feminism, not just Plato's views. And the question is whether we are okay with a kind of equality that is consistent with and also buttresses a class-based inequality. And she asks whether some versions of feminism haven't inherited precisely this structure, fighting for the inclusion of women in positions of power without questioning the legitimacy of that power and the hierarchies that produce them. So philosopher queens get to rule. Hairy cobblers, male and female, remain ruled. And does feminism sometimes become more interested in populating the top of the hierarchy than in, dismantling, right? Is the argument that more women should be included in these positions of power? Or is it to critique the systems by which power is produced in a way that benefits some over others?